Very good. So we're going to open in prayer here. All right, dear Jesus, Lord, it is good to be here. Lord, I thank you for the interest in doing all that we can to parent our kids in a way that would honor you. So Lord, I pray that you would just open our minds, open our hearts to how you would have us raise our kids. Lord, I pray against any distractions now that we could just focus and learn. And Lord, I pray that you would ultimately be glorified by how we correct and discipline our children. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so the moment you've all been waiting for. How do we discipline our kids? This is kind of there's a lot of information in this one. It's a couple of chapters in the book, but it was really a very neat way just to kind of lay it all out, and it's very organized, pretty detailed, but I think you'll be excited to learn what we have here today.
Right, and I'm going to start with review because as we get to this part of correction, we have to also know that it's built on a foundation. So everything that we've talked about in all the parenting workshops previously is a understanding that you're employing these things in your family so that it works all together. So in review, we started our first parenting workshop with Right Beginnings and building a healthy family identity. And with Right Beginnings, we talked about the greatest influence in your family for your children will come from the role as you as not mom and dad, but husband and wife, and how a strong marriage can be a reflection for your kids on just the stability of your family. And then we went into building a healthy family identity, making memories, building traditions, like having fun with your family, where your kids know that you're both on board and you're for your family, and you say it and you live it out, and then with that there comes the security of knowing that mom and dad are okay and their world is okay, because that's so important to the children. The next parenting workshop, we talked about training your child's heart. And we explained that implies explaining the moral reason why behind their behaviors and your correction. As you train, you can use everyday circumstances when you see things happening out in the world. You can be training all the time and talking to your kids about different things you see, and why are the why nots behind those different behaviors or activities. And then we moved on to character development, where we talked about respect for authority and parents and age, peers, property, and nature, and how it's important to build their moral warehouses, because if there's no morality built in them by you as parents, it's going to be empty. And so they're going to get to a situation and they're going to be like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have that planted in me, so I don't know how to respond correctly to that in a God-honoring way. Obviously, there are responses that are alternatives to that. And then principles of obedience and discipline with encouragement was our last parenting workshop. And there we talked about training your kids to God's standard, how that looks like, biblical discipline. It trains the heart and fosters moral development. So now we're going to move on to discipline with correction.
Yeah, so that's our topic for this workshop. It is important to remember that correction is just one small part of moral training. And discipline is most effective if you have a healthy relationship with your child. So it's always going to work better if there is a healthy relationship there. So to put this in perspective, the discipline is just one small part of correction. Kind of correction is the bigger image. We're going to pass out the discipline flow chart. Is that over here?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. This one here. So this looks really scary, I know. It's like, oh my goodness, I thought I was done with flow charts in school. But this is really helpful if you it just gives you the big picture of it. But what I'd like you to look at is if you see B3 is correction on there, and look at everything past that, all those boxes going to the right, childish, foolishness, admonishment, lots and lots of boxes. Punishment is just one box. Under the 3 levels of offense, there's 1, 2, and number 3 is the consequential punishment. So really, a lot of times we think that punishment and correction are synonymous. They're the same thing. But punishment is just one small part of correction, and that's a really big thing. We are going to learn about punishment today, but we're also going to talk about other forms of correction as well. So a little bit more as far as the difference between punishment and correction, it helps to define them first. So punishment is basically a fitting retribution for an offense. So in child training, it serves as a moral purpose. It communicates to your child the value of good and evil by the weight of the punishment that's ascribed to each wrongful act. So it's linked only to those with rightful authority over the child. You wouldn't want somebody punishing your child who doesn't really have rightful authority over them. And as I said, punishment is only one small part of correcting your child, and that's very clear when you look at that discipline flow chart there. So that's punishment. So what is correction? Correction is much more broad. That's the act of bringing back from error or unacceptable deviation from the standard. So your child's doing something that he or she shouldn't be doing. Is how do we bring them back, basically? And correction helps our children to learn. Another difference, punishment does employ correction, but not all corrections require punishment. And just some general principles with this. In the early years, when your kids are younger, especially under the age of maybe 5 or 6, you're just putting lots and lots of character into your child. And that never stops, but it's especially heavy in the early years. And you're basically exchanging wisdom for foolishness. Foolishness is how all children are, just kind of doing things, maybe the right intention, but not things the way that they should, and you're exchanging that with wisdom. And children by self-nature, they're self-oriented. In fact, I think adults are as well in a lot of ways. But biblical ethics are others-oriented, and Jesus lived it out the best. He lived the most perfect others-oriented life. But there's tension between these two, self-oriented and others-oriented. So basically, there's 2 rules of correction that kind of help sort things out. The first rule is the type of correction depends on the presence or absence of an evil motive. And that's really, really important. And it's pretty easy to see in our kids, if what they did, if it was just truly an accident, or they didn't mean to do any harm, or if they're really trying to, they had an evil motive behind it. So with this, you want to ask, was my child's wrong action accidental, or was it intentional? And bad decisions and accidents, the consequences of these are often more of a natural consequence or a logical consequence. But if it's more of an intentional moral violation, an evil motive that affects other people, that's really what calls for punishment. And punishment is typically used a lot more in the early years. And then in the later years, like pre-adolescence, adolescent years, starting around age 8 or so, there's still times when punishment might be necessary, but at that point, it's more the natural and logical consequences. We're going to go over all this in detail today. This is just kind of the big picture we're sharing right now. There's a graph that shows in the book, which kind of explains how in the early age you want to use a lot of punishment. Punishment kind of tapers off as they get older. When they're younger, you're doing more consequences, and that gets more and more as they get older. So you can kind of see this graph here. So this is the age of the child, age birth up to 14. And punishment, you're doing a lot more punishment at a younger age, and then the punishment kind of tapers off. And then more consequences. There's not as many of them for a 2-year-old. That's more punishment. And then as they get older, it kind of replaces the punishment more or less. It never completely replaces it, but that's kind of the trend. So that's the first rule, is determining if there is an evil motive involved. And the second rule is really the punishment and the consequence must fit the crime. And this is a lot harder. It's like, okay, my child did this wrong. How do we handle this? And that's how we're going to spend most of today, is going through this discipline flow chart and just deciding what the proper punishment or consequence is based on what they had done. And the goal here is we don't want to underpunish and we don't want to overpunish. because punishment places a value on the action. I'm going to say that again because that's really, really important. You know, the type of punishment that your child receives really teaches your child, it puts a value on what they have done. So an example of under punishing, let's say your child hits another child with a chair, and that's pretty major, and they get a timeout from it. You know, that's an example of under punishing. In the mind of the child, it's like what they did really wasn't that bad. You know, like got was a little timeout, so it must not have been that bad. So that's just is an example of that. And there's also examples of over punishing. Let's say your child leaves a light on when they left a room, and you say, okay, that's it. No video games for a month. It's like, oh my goodness, you know. So both of these are dangerous, either under punishing or over punishing, because they send the wrong message to your child as far as the value of what they have done. So just a quick review over those two rules. Before you can really deal with an offense effectively, you need to ask yourself two questions. Number one, was what my child did the result of an accident, or was it malicious? You know, was there evil intent? And I think that's pretty easy when you know your kids pretty well. You can just see just by the look on their face sometimes. But the harder one is rule number two. What punishment would fit the wrong and convey the right value message? And we're going to help you figure that out today. We're going to go through the correction part of the flow chart. So Melissa's going to go into childishness, but if you just kind of look at the flow chart again, B3 is correction, B2 is encouragement. It is good to remember there is that discipline with encouragement. We did that at the last workshop, and that's really an important piece. But we're going to spend the entire workshop today, everything to the right of correction. So first, Melissa's going to talk about childishness and how that distinguishes from foolishness.
So in the rectangle B4, we have the title childishness. Sometimes we plan to do wrong, but there are times when we just make honest mistakes. And willful, intentional defiance and open rebellion are what the Bible calls foolishness, and that's what we'll talk about in a little bit, the B5 rectangle. Proverbs 22:15 says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. So if you look at the root word of folly, which means deception, trickery, disobedience, lacking in wisdom, or rebellion, the Bible says foolish acts are rebellious acts. So honest mistakes are just that, mistakes with no ill will attached. So when young children make honest mistakes, we label their behavior, it's childishness. So childishness is a mistake, an accident, or unwise decision that's made in the absence of ill motives. They really didn't mean to. It was an accident, no ill will attached to it. Although there is no ill will or intent to do wrong, correction sometimes still needs to be applied. So the consequences applied are through admonishment and related consequences, and you'll see those rectangles to the right of childishness. So this admonishment means to put into one's mind or to warn. We kind of talked about verbal reminders with the encouragement side of things, pre-activity, encouragement, but admonishment means to warn. So it is to warn the child that an action or lack of action is unwise and that it may bring calamity upon them or to others. And so it's your way to gently encourage them and to warn them that, hey, think about this. Something, don't want to bring calamity. So, for example, we just picked Ryan's name out. I just wanted to say that it's not your Ryan, but Ryan, who is usually characterized by being conscientious about parking his bike inside the garage when he's done riding it, is excited about some news of his good report card, and so he drops his bike in the front yard and he runs in the house. Mom, I got all A's on my report card, and he's really excited. So he forgets about his bike with his excitement. So he's usually conscientious, so he's characterized by parking his bike inside the garage. Dad gets home from work and notices Ryan's bike in the front yard. And so he learns that Ryan, through talking to him, Ryan, I see your bike is on the front lawn. Why didn't you park it in the garage? Oh, I was so excited about my report card. I wanted to get in and tell Mom I'm sorry. So it was wrong to leave the bike out in the yard because Ryan's been told, and now he needs a reminder that, hey, if you leave it outside, it's going to get rusty. It might get stolen, depending on your situation. Was it wrong to disobey? Was there ill intent in it? No. So you have to kind of go through these steps quickly in your mind. Mm-hmm. And so in this case, Dad admonishes Ryan by saying, Ryan, we need to be responsible with your property. We don't want it stolen. We don't want it to get rusty. We want to take care of it. So please remember this the next time. Get your bike in the garage. So it's a warning, verbal warning, admonishment. The next is if now let's say Ryan forgets, or he's been warned, he's had that admonishment. A couple days later, he's riding his bike and he gets home, drops it in the yard just to go in to get something he forgot, and he gets sidetracked, and Dad comes home and finds the bike in the yard again. Okay, so he's just had the warning. It's again childishness because we all do that, get sidetracked, right? But this time there's a related consequence because Ryan has been just warned. So some mistakes bypass the warning stage and require immediate consequences. So they need to be logical and related to the mistake. So the purpose of consequences is to encourage good stewardship and to cause the child to act responsibly for non-rebellious yet unwise acts. So although there was no ill intent, he didn't mean to disobey, sometimes there still needs to be related consequences to teach into the situation. And so in this case, Dad might say, because the warning admonishment was just given a day or two before, Ryan, I understand that you got sidetracked, you left your bike in the yard, you didn't mean to, but I want to teach you responsibility for your property, and so I'm gonna take the bike away for 2 days to teach you that you need to park it in the garage. And so do you see how that relates to the consequences relate to the behavior, and it's teaching without being too harsh. Okay?
I guess the opposite would be, you left your bike out, no video games. That would be an unrelated consequence.
Exactly.
And it's always better if the consequence is related to what their pattern is.
Yeah. So when mistakes come, they are usually associated with property, privileges, and personal responsibility. Children need to learn the association between their decisions and the consequences that come from their decisions. Mm-hmm. So let's look when mistakes come, when it deals with property, okay? So teaching a child how to be a good steward of possessions will help him or her be responsible with the property of their own property and the property of others. So let's say, I kind of went into this example this last time. Okay. Yeah. So I just explained the leaving, not intending, so Dad took away the bike. So that's how you discipline by related consequences related to property. Okay. Now, explanation should always accompany the stewardship training. And I explained how the dad in that example explained why we put the bike in the garage. And the older the child gets, the more if you don't want eye rolling, the briefer your explanations can be and need to be. Yeah. And then when mistakes come that are childish, there's a related consequence. A related consequence might be to lose a privilege, and that's what we're going to talk about in the rectangle C4, privilege. A parent can also structure related consequences to help a child be responsible with a privilege. For example, let's say Susie is out and she wants to feed the birds, and the mom says, yes, you may feed the birds, but I want you to do it on the lawn because if you do it up on the deck, it leaves a big mess. Well, Susie, actually, she's instructed, because that would be, I'm getting away from my example. So the child asks if she can feed the birds. The parent says yes, but please do so in the grass and not on the deck. The parent finds the child on the deck feeding the birds. So the child is usually characterized by obeying mom, and when she's fed the birds in the past, she's always gone in the grass to do it. And this time she decides for whatever reason to be on the deck. Now, there's a fine line because that kind of looks like they're just disobeying your instructions. So in this case, it's more of a childish act because she's usually characterized by it, and for some reason she doesn't. So the parent can take away the privilege of feeding those birds, let's say, the next time she wants to do it. I'm sorry, but remember the last time you fed them on the deck when you weren't supposed to, so the privilege has been taken away for a while. And then in that instance, then the parent may say, and you need to clean up the mess as well. So the consequences are taking away privilege. We're still talking about childish acts here, no ill will intent. And now we're going to another related consequence, takes the form of personal responsibility. So parents should hold children personally responsible for non-rebellious accidents that affect other people or property. For example, let's say a child is playing an innocent game of hide and seek, and they trip over a lamp cord and the lamp falls over and breaks. Was there ill intent involved? Nope, it was just childishness. They just were not being careful in their play. So it was non-intentional, but the damage was done. So one way to have a related consequence, depending on the age of the child, is to maybe to explain again that, hey, even though you were playing a game and you didn't mean for this to happen, the lamp still broke. And so we're going to ask you to do additional chores to help pay for that lamp. So it just kind of helps the child to, again, be more aware of what they're doing and help as they grow up. You want those childish ways to turn into more responsible behavior.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So one of the big problems at our house is admitting whoever did it. Like everyone sits there and goes, it wasn't me, it wasn't me, and then you have to go through this whole, okay, we're gonna sit here and tell someone, and then Ryan will usually admit to it just because he wants to move on, and and it's like, well, that's not really always the case either. I'm like, don't accept fault for something you didn't do.
Yes.
But how do you get them to?
Yeah, because they don't want to be the ones getting in trouble, right?
Right.
Yeah. So we really went back to just, again, using God's word to help you through many things. Like it's one important thing to, as adults too, and to live this out, is to be truthful. And when you're truthful, then like that pleases us, it pleases God. Do you have anything to add? Like we want the truth, and we're going to be fair. Especially, you don't want to be like bribing them into the truth and say, well, because you told me the truth, then there's no consequence. Because, but it gets a little tricky. We understand that because they're less likely to be like, so I feel like when they know that it's just fairness in the consequence, again, do you have anything to add with that?
I don't see that admitting to it isn't, like when they sit and lie to me about it, that makes me more upset than
Exactly.
whatever was actually usually
Exactly.
the first thing that happened.
Exactly.
We're trying to make them realize that if you just come clean up front, the consequence is probably pretty minimal.
Exactly.
But now that you've lied to me for 2 hours and we've gone around and around, by the end of that, I'm usually pretty upset.
Exactly.
You just wasted everyone's time and you lied to me for 2 hours straight.
Yes.
That's usually where the consequence ends up coming from more than if you just would have been.
Yeah, and that's a
Very
good
true.
approach because it shows you're more concerned about their heart.
Yeah.
You know, that's really the key is training their hearts and where is their heart. And all of a sudden it's not as big of a deal like who knocked over the lamp and broke the light bulb. It's like honesty is even a greater virtue and trying to work through that a little bit more. But that's a tough one. A couple little things, you know, I think maybe if you're just kind of starting to work through that, maybe having a little bit of slack, like when they do tell the truth, like, thank you so much, and just really that encouragement when they do tell the truth. And I know it's not easy because you know you did the wrong thing and there's going to be some consequence with that, but I'm really proud of you for doing that. So like you said, it's going to be less of a consequence maybe than it would have been if it was 2 hours later after going around and around.
Right. Okay.
And then maybe over time they like, oh yeah, you know, it feels good to tell the truth. My parents, you know, see the value in that, and I'm, you know, encouraged, and I still get consequences, but it's not quite as bad as when I lied about it, type of a thing.
Yeah, and we took lying very seriously. Like that was a form of, you know, of
It was a level 3
a
offense.
level,
We'll get to
yeah.
that. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that sounds pretty
Yeah,
serious,
we'll get
doesn't
to
it?
level 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was like, and yeah, I like that. Like if you just come forward, and it's even better. Like, let's say, you know, you're out for a little bit and you find something later, like, okay, this wasn't broken before and now it's broken, and you know, we encourage our kids, it's much better to tell us, let's say when we get home from the event and say, you know, we're goofing around and we know we should have been throwing the ball outside, but we were playing in the house and we knocked over the lamp and broke it. That's going to be a much, you know, better way for them to, like, okay, thank you, you know, again, that encouragement to thank you for coming to us. We really appreciate not finding this later and then wondering who did it, and actually encouraging that kind of behavior. Yeah, and like the slack a little bit, like that's much better than to lie, because the lying will have greater consequence.
Yeah, we came home one time and the cupboard door was laying on the counter. Speaking of like, but then no one did it. Like the cupboard door just jumped off and decided it was going to rest on the counter instead of hanging.
Again.
Where it was supposed to be. Yeah.
Well,
I don't
born
think we ever
yesterday.
found out what happened
No,
with
we're
it.
gonna find out.
But it's those sort of things, and then like I think Ryan will usually take the blame for it just because he's like, let's just move on. And I'm like, but then you think as he gets older, you know, and like, what if he was being questioned by the police for something and
Does
he
that
didn't
for his
do
friends.
it? Yeah, and then but he's like, I just want to get out of here. So fine, yeah, I did it. Like you see things like that on TV where they were like being questioned for hours upon hours, and they just want to get out, and they're like, okay, I did it, and then all of a sudden like. Now he's in serious trouble. Like I don't want him to be like, okay, I'll just take the blame so I can move on. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my, now I'm really in a hole.
Yeah, and that is true. Maybe instead of like, if nobody's willing to come forward, then you both think of something like, okay, what is going to hurt them in this situation for nobody coming forward, and whether that's like isolation in their rooms, doing nothing for whatever time, like whatever you figure is going to be hurt the worst, you know, or
biggest
have
impact.
the biggest impact. And you just take that time just to say, okay, if this is how it's going to be, this will be the consequence for you all, and everybody's treated equally, and because we just want the truth, because the truth is important, and that is true to teach into that. Then why is it important to tell the truth? It's good to come forward, you know, all of the things that and then you're not getting frustrated in the process, like, well, I can go on with my 2 hours, I don't have to sit here, you know, until we feel so then you're not getting all frustrated.
We have the same problem at our house, but now we do that happens a lot. Vardy likes to blame Ozias for stuff that isn't even feasible. he's like this tall, and she's blaming him for stuff that's falling off the counters because she likes to climb on stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then when we catch her doing that stuff and we punish her, it's usually some time to herself in her room. But as of late, you go to do that and she'll slam the door.
Yeah.
And we have like, well, I don't know, were you guys ever over at Jess and Brandon's old place?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're kind of familiar with the house.
Uh-huh.
That room that I think Enoch was sleeping in
Uh-huh.
with that contact paper on the over the French doors.
Yes, yep,
That's Vari's room.
okay.
Well, she goes in there and she'll slam the door and then she'll kick.
Oh,
Well, those are glass panels in there, and
Yeah.
the last thing I need is for her to put her foot through one and
Yeah.
gash her leg open. I don't care about the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
Replace that. But
yeah, yeah.
you don't want her doing something out of anger
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's going to cost her in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've done that as a kid. You know, you get mad and
yeah,
you punch the wall, and next thing you know, you got a broken finger, and
Yep.
now you're mad at yourself for punching
Yeah.
the wall.
Yeah.
yes.
I don't want irrational behavior to be a consequence for her later on. Like if she would
Yeah.
kick through that panel and cut her leg open, then now we got more problems.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's
Right.
a great dilemma.
So I don't know how do we get her to stop doing that, and then
Yeah.
when you do, how do you punish her for that? Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I feel like we're getting rebellion on the punishment. So how do you punish
Yeah.
that when you can't even get the first one to work?
Yeah, and that's a
yeah.
perfect lead into this next session.
Yes.
We're really going to get into that. Yeah, that's really a good dilemma. Not
Yeah.
in a good way, like,
Right.
"Ooh, this is
Yeah.
fun, but it's a good example.
Right,
Yes.
and she does it like and then it carries on to even like she'll get mad at her brothers and sisters and
Yeah.
just
Mm.
Yeah.
be mean.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you go to like I don't want to spank her because then she looks at me like I'm a bad guy.
Yeah.
Especially you can't spank her when I'm telling her not to hit her brother and sister.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, okay, you can't hit them, but I can spank you because you hit
Yeah.
them. That doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we're getting kind of stuck with her, and it's
Yeah.
starting to come out at school.
Yep.
She's, the teachers at Head Start, they're like, you don't even see it coming.
Yeah.
Mm.
Like she'll be rubbing somebody's back and then turn around and punch the kid behind her.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
getting,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
know, and I think a lot of that started when we were putting her in her room and she's kicking the door and just,
Yeah.
we never addressed that, and now it's
Yeah.
really starting to get,
Yeah.
and she's
Yeah.
a little brute. She is very strong.
How old is she?
5.
Okay. Yeah.
She's extremely strong, and I am afraid that,
Yeah.
you know, especially at Head Start, she's 5. Those kids are like 3 and 4.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'm afraid she's gonna do something because she
Yeah.
gets mad,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and she's gonna hurt one of the kids or whatever. So we need some.
Yeah. You mentioned the word rebellion. That's exactly this next section here. So
Yeah.
we're right on.
Yeah, I think
on
that
track
some
here.
things are gonna be answered and then we can address specifics.
Yep.
As,
Absolutely.
as you listen to this. One thing, would it be helpful to know our experience really quickly with this whole learning about this portion?
I think maybe afterwards it would make more sense because, yeah, it'd be get ahead of us a little bit. I
Okay.
think, but yeah, it's a good example.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so next we're going to shift gears from childishness to foolishness. And childishness, like we said, when you kind of ask yourself those two questions. The first one is, was there ill intent or not? Was it just some kind of an accident? And the second was, how bad of an offense is it? So it really, was there ill intent or not? Was it malicious behavior? Is childishness or foolishness? Childishness is just kind of an accident. Just knocked over something innocently or left the bike in the yard, because they were excited. But now we're moving on to foolishness, which is B5 on your discipline flow chart yet. You can see childish doesn't have a whole lot to the right of it. It's a lot easier to deal with, but foolishness has a lot more details on that chart. You see that B5 foolishness, there's a lot to that. We're going to spend the rest of today kind of going over that portion of the chart. So basically, foolishness. A child is not acting childishly when he or she is disobedient. because that's their heart is involved now. He or she is acting foolishly when they're disobedient. So foolishness means deception, trickery, disobedience, unwise or rebellious behavior, and you can see all those have to do with their heart. And there's two types of rebellion. It can either be active rebellion or it can be passive rebellion. And active rebellion is easy to see. You know, kicking the door, slamming the door, things like that's active rebellion. You know, disobeying, talking back, refusing to accept correction, rejection of any form of authority. It's a direct, willful defiance, and that's pretty easy to see. Then there's passive rebellion, which is just as bad because it's the same heart issue, but it's a lot harder to see. And this is indirect defiance. So this might begin with more of a hidden attitude in your child that eventually shows up on their face, is kind of a defiant look type of a thing. It might be a time when they're kind of pretending not to hear. You know they heard, but it's like pretending they didn't hear what you said. Pleading ignorance. Well, I didn't know. You know, if I would have only known, I wouldn't have done that. You know, doing something good or cute to get out of doing something that was instructed. Or you're constantly saying, I forgot, I forgot, I forgot. You know, those are all examples of passive rebellion. But it's important, rebellion's rebellion, because it's the heart, and we really need to deal with them both similarly. So the job of the parent is to transform the heart from what it is to what it should be. And that's kind of another big picture part of disciplining our kids and parenting. Again, the job of the parent is to transform that heart into what it is, into what it should be. And parents should consider the following 4 factors when rendering a judicial decision about a child's foolish action. So as you're trying to decide, you know, if you look on the chart again, there's foolishness, and then there's 3 levels of offense. I kind of mentioned before, that's a level 3 offense. There really is level 1, level 2, level 3, and we're going to go through each of those. But the way you decide what level of offense it is there's these 4 things that can kind of help you through that. Number 1, how frequently is this happening? Is this kind of an isolated thing, or is this pattern is developing day after day after day? I mean, that's a big difference. So that's one part of deciding what level of offense it should be. Second is the age of the child. Is a child old enough where they should really know better, or they, you know, is it more of a childish thing because they're just young, they're not old enough to really comprehend yet. The next is the context of the moment. You know, I like the bicycle being left in the yard is a great example. I mean, the context. I mean, this boy got a good report card. He's excited, can't wait to tell mom. He runs in the house. You don't want to do a level 3 full weight of the law. What do you know, never again. You know, you're done riding your bike for a month.
Grounded when you're 18.
Yeah.
So it's good to look at the context of the moment. But then the next day, it was after it happened. You know, that's a little bit different. Then the final one is the overall characterization of the behavior, and that's like, you know, if you're seeing this ongoing pattern, that's a little bit different than if they're not really characterized by that. So again, those are 4 ways you can kind of determine what level of offense it is. And then once a parent identifies that the behavior was foolish or rebellious, using those above factors, now it's time to determine, you know, what's the level of consequence? You know, how do we handle this? And it's important to remember the first rule of correction is the punishment must fit the crime. You know, we want to have too harsh of a consequence because it'll exasperate our child. And also if it's too lenient of a punishment, it doesn't really put the right value on what they've done. And they think, oh, that wasn't a bad deal to throw a chair at my sibling. And we don't want that to happen either.
Yep.
Yeah, right. So because we know that these offenses do have a range, the correction should reflect the degree of the offense. And the foolishness falls into really one of 3 levels. And those are the levels 1, 2, and 3. So the first level is, on the chart it says a verbal admonishment. That's more how you respond to it. But basically the level 1 offense is just basically a minor infraction, just something minor. It just really just calls for a verbal correction. Then number 2, where it says verbal admonishment and action, this is a little bit bigger, you know, an infraction that needs some action along with it, not just a verbal correction, but now you need to provide some action along with it, more than a verbal reprimand. And then a level 3 is, needs to be really the full weight of the law at this one. There's some kind of consequential punishment for level 3. And we're going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail here. So it is good to know that these levels don't really go in order. Like, it's not like when they're little, they have number 1, and they get older, now we're on level, these happen in all ages. In the early years, we often use a level 3 a little bit more than a level 1 or 2. And as they get older, we tend to use level 1 and level 2 more than the level 3 when they're, 12, age and up in adolescence and that type of thing. So level 1 is for more of a minor offense. And again, you kind of look at those 4 things: the frequency, the age, the context. Are they characterized by this? If it's kind of a minor offense, really the warning does not reduce. It's basically just a warning, a verbal warning. And it's good to know that just because it's a warning, it doesn't reduce the significance of they need to obey the first time. This first time obedience is really our goal. And these are things that typically you shouldn't be doing this if it's an ongoing warning. If this is happening every single day, then it's probably moving up to a level 2 offense, unless they're really young and they just aren't capable of knowing the difference. So that's basically level 1, not a whole lot to teach into that. Level 2, so these are typically some kind of a new offense, something that you haven't ever seen before, that's completely unacceptable. Or if it's an ongoing behavior that's becoming more common, maybe an old habit like slamming the door, we kind of had it all doing well, we're doing great, she kind of learned, but now all of a sudden it's coming back, she's doing this again. That would probably be a level 2 offense because this old habit is reemerging. Or maybe yesterday's warning, like the bike on the lawn, here we are the next day, it happened again. Yesterday's warning has not been heeded. So now there's still the warning, there's still the verbal admonishment, but now there needs to be some type of action along with it. And we're not going to get to level 3 until the bottom of this page. We're still on level 2. So just some ways you can bring action into this too. If you feel like, the warning's not enough, we need to do something. Not the full weight of the law, but we need some type of action with this warning. This is a perfect time for what we call a reflective sit time, kind of like a timeout type thing. It's not the same as isolation. Isolation, you'll see F5, that's part of a full level 3 offense, all the way to the right. So isolation is a little bit different, but a reflective sit time really has 3 purposes. Number 1, it's preventive. You're trying to use this to control their emotional or physical energy. It's like, okay, she's gonna slam the door, she's gonna put her foot through the glass or whatever it is. Okay, let's prevent that. Let's kind of have this little reflective sit time, just kind of have my child kind of get control of his or her emotions. The second of the 3, it's kind of a maintenance strategy too, and not just preventing, but actually maintains things. It helps your child realign his or her thinking and gain self-control. If they're kind of going down this wrong path, this is really going to get out of hand. It helps them get self-control that way as well. And the third purpose, it can be a corrective strategy also, so it can be preventive, it can be maintenance, but it can also be corrective. By assisting a parent in bringing a child to repentance, also forgiveness and restoration. And the child really reflects on the matters of the heart, getting back to the heart training. So an example of this, let's say your child is playing kickball, a parent comes over and says, hey, I just spent a lot of time on this garden, it looks beautiful, you're getting kind of close, I really want you to be careful not to destroy my newly planted garden. So you're kind of looking out the window and you notice, they're kind of being careful now. They're kind of getting back over by the garden again, and the ball's being kicked really, really close. They haven't really disobeyed. They haven't torn up the garden, but it's like, okay, this is kind of going the wrong direction here. This would be a good time for a reflective sit time. Maybe 5 minutes, hoping that your child will kind of gain self-control and follow the earlier instructions. So this next section talks about timeouts a little bit, and it really is true that it says timeouts really, they're not the most effective form of punishment if it's kind of an ongoing thing. It definitely has a place, like we said, more in this level 2 offense. But if it's the primary method of punishment, like that's really, good job, Jackson, you got my attention. It's like, I bet if I knock this pen off the chair, he'll reach down and pet me. But I'm not going to do it because it's rewarding as bad behavior. So you can use it on your pets too. So if you're using the a reflective sit time or a timeout is a level 3 offense, the full weight of the law, it's really not going to work very well for that. And there's 2 reasons. Number one, your child rarely associates sitting in a chair or sitting in his room with what he or she did. They usually associate it with mom or dad is really mad at me, and that's why I'm sitting here. It's not like, oh man, I knocked this over when I was told not to, and now I'm sitting here. It usually escalates, and as they're sitting there, there's not a real clear cause and effect of why am I in my room right now, as well as some of the other things we'll talk about. So I'll just kind of review that again. So they rarely see sitting in the chair with the act that he or she is being punished for, because the frustration of the parent is usually a more dominant factor in the situation than the act itself. And the second reason that timeouts aren't as effective, if that's the primary mode of punishment, there's really little to no punishment equivalent. Let's say your son hits his sibling with a plastic bat, and now he's getting a timeout for it. It's basically, in our opinion, it's under punishing, and it's kind of teaching their heart that it really wasn't that big of a deal, type of a thing. So that's level 1, level 2, and now we'll move on to a level 3 offense. And you can see level 1 and 2 on the flow chart. There's really nothing to the right of it. There's going to be a lot of discussion now about what do you do for these level 3 offenses. But it's really good to just keep asking yourself, is this really a level 3 offense or not? Because you don't want to use this for everything. There is number 1, verbal. There's number 2, verbal with some type of action, like a reflective sit time. But now we're down to the consequential punishment, for a level 3.
So how is reflective sit time different from timeout?
Yeah, I think they're pretty synonymous, but I like the term reflective sit time because you're really trying to get their heart involved, and while you're kind of telling while you're sitting here, I want you to think about this.
Okay.
And this is what I'm noticing, and this is not good. You're kind of going down this path, and you have something else you wanted to say?
Just it's used before they actually do something
Oh,
that
sure.
requires.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's almost like, okay, you're like looking, you're like, oh,
You see it's
Ryan is heading in the wrong direction. I'm gonna help him stay out of this level 3 offense kind of punishment, and have him just gain some self-control, and so it's used beforehand.
Yeah.
Whereas timeouts usually are used in typical sense, like you're in trouble, you've done something, you've hit your sister, now go to a timeout.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's after the fact.
Yeah, good. But I think you can still use the timeout reflective sit time for a level 2 offense.
Yeah.
It can still be, the warning plus the action. You can still use it. We're not saying don't ever use it, but we don't want that to be the main mode of correction or punishment, especially if we're getting down to active rebellion, or even passive rebellion.
It's okay.
All right, so level 3. Here, the level of the offense refers to routine acts, meaning it's happening very routinely, common. Attitudes of rebellion. I like the word attitude. It's not necessarily just active. It could also be passive rebellion because it's still a heart issue. And also to a moral violation against others, including siblings, peers, parents, or others in authority. So just, moral violations. And with this, we're using applied consequences, which brings some sort of pain into the child's life. And we're going to learn, there is the spanking part of pain. There's also other types of pain that we're going to talk about with this as well. But really, for a level 3 offense, there's got to be some pain involved. And it can come through a natural logical consequence, loss of a privilege, restitution, or chastisement, which is kind of the biblical term for spanking. So we're going to spend the rest of today talking about what do you do for level 3 offense, and what is pain, and why do we experience that in our life, and how can we use that to not just discipline our kids, but really to train their hearts.
Right.
Yeah.
So 2 goals to achieve in the correction process. One is to help our children take ownership of their decisions, because as they grow up, we want to teach them that you make a decision, you have ownership of it. There's, and then the other one is, number 2 is help them learn how to make wise decisions. This comes with moral maturity and proper training. as we all know. We
Yeah.
didn't get from A to, from our childhood to adulthood without training. And so the most effective way to bring attention to poor decisions is to allow children to experience the consequences of their choices. Sometimes choices result in pain. Rebellious and defiant acts sometimes produce their own pain as a natural outcome. And when they do not, parents must structure the appropriate form of consequence to motivate change. So pain is an educator. It's important to look and to know that pain really is a gift from God. It didn't come as a result of Adam's sin in the garden. Pain is a gift from God. If we touch something hot, it's a gift to have these pain receptors to be like, remove your hand, this is hot, you're gonna get, a burn. So it warns us that something is not right and needs attention. In the training process, pain has one purpose. It helps a child focus and gain self-control over destructive behavior, whether it's disobeying, talking back, or intentional discourtesy. Pain associated with discipline comes one of two ways. As we talked about natural consequences, the pain is natural, a natural outcome due to the wrong behavior, and also structured consequences, which are brought into the child's life through some form of punishment. So we're going to first look at pain associated with natural consequences. So rebellious and defiant acts will sometimes produce their own pain as a natural outcome of foolish behavior. For example, a child, you're taking a walk, and a child, you notice as a parent that there's cracks all over the sidewalk, and so you tell the child, Johnny, you may not want to run during this part because look at all the cracks. And the child chooses to run anyway and disobey your instructions, and they trip and fall and they scrape their knee. Well, you wouldn't then go and spank them for that because they already have a bloody knee. So you can teach into that and say, Mom, I've lived longer than you. I've tripped and skinned my knee before. You need to listen to my directions and obey me because I'm trying to look out for you. And
You say
this
I
was
told
an-
you so in a really nice way.
That happens at our house a lot.
Yeah.
the
Like
nat-
Melissa's constantly telling Ella, stop climbing on the chairs, you're gonna get hurt. Well, the other day, she decided she was gonna excuse herself from the table, and instead of asking for help, she stood up in her booster chair and stepped over the armrest of it onto, supposed to be onto the next chair, and her foot slid off the side of the chair. The chair went sliding out. She went sideways off of her chair, landed on her head, like scorpioned herself in the middle of the kitchen.
Wow.
Started bawling, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking, "Told you,
Yeah.
told you not
Yeah.
to do that. There's a reason."
Yeah.
But it's amazing. You tell the kid not to, or Allie and Barry are good for it because they're
Yeah.
to that age now where you can tell them no running in the house
Yeah.
or no gymnastics in the house.
yeah.
Yeah.
Allie did a cartwheel, and we have those old radiator furnaces.
Oh yeah.
Whoever lived there, or maybe even the landlord did, but they put like a box around it, like a wood
Yeah.
casing with some chicken wire or something to keep the people from touching it or from them being exposed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Allie did a cartwheel, and her leg came down, and she whacked her ankle right on the corner of that, and she laid in the middle of the living room and howled and howled.
Yeah.
And that's usually what we say to them, like, I'm sorry that you got hurt. That makes me sad.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why we told you
Yeah.
no cartwheels in the living room.
Yeah.
The natural consequence.
Right, and it usually calms them down. I mean, obviously they're still hurt, so they're
Yeah.
kind of doing
Yeah.
that thing after, but it usually calms them down just to let them know, like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm sorry
Yeah.
that you got hurt. That
Yeah.
does make me sad.
Yeah.
But this is why we tell you no running in the house, no
Good
jumping, no
example.
gymnastics. Or,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to bite your lip and not say, I told you so. Because
Right.
really, what's that going to teach them?
Well,
But
it's
to
gonna make
actually
them-
do what you are saying,
Yeah.
you're like, this is why we tell you
Yeah.
not to do this.
Yeah.
And that can come across as like a shaming.
Yeah.
Like, I told you so.
Yeah.
I told you not to
It
do
is.
that.
Absolutely.
That can make
Exactly.
them feel bad, like,
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
you know.
yeah, nobody likes to
Right.
hear that. Yeah, so, okay. So, example of natural consequences having limits. Okay, so a natural consequence having limits. Okay, so let's say that you have a play date or something scheduled for your child, and you need to leave by a certain time. It's like preschool or something, or it's not something that it's more of a privilege, like it's a fun thing that they're doing. Okay, but you still need to be there on time. Okay, so rather than getting exasperated as a parent and say you need to be ready by the time we need to leave in order to get there on time, let's say the child is just characterized by being late. Okay, just running behind, and so you're working on this. That's the whole point, is you're trying to teach into your child, you're trying to work with them. And so to lessen your stress, a wise choice would be to say, let's say you would have to leave by 8:45 in order to get there by 9. So you say, I need you ready by 8:30. And then that way, when you give your verbal, remember all these pre-activity encouragements and all these things that we're doing prior to hopefully not even getting to this point of needing to punish or anything, you're saying, I need you ready by 8:30. And if they're not ready by 8:30, you may then give a 5-minute warning, like we learned in the encouragement side of things, and say, you have 5 minutes. I'm giving you the 5 minute, or maybe at 8:25, you say, you have 5 minutes to be ready, and they're not ready by 8:30, then you're saying, you take away the logical thing, the natural consequence would be they don't get to go that day. And therefore you're not frustrated, you're not pulling them out the door, getting them, everybody's yelling, and we've all had those mornings where you're just like trying to get out the door, and there are some cases where you can try to be wise and structure some things so that you're training them, it's to be on time or to be ready on time. And if not, in this case, you can take away that privilege of going to,
What about when somewhere they have to go?
like school, for example.
Yeah.
Example.
Oh, sorry to be.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
but yeah, you have to go. You can't be like, okay, then you get to stay home. They're like, yes.
I'll do it every day.
Yeah.
So that would backfire, right?
Yeah.
So,
Like when we get back, we really have to do this, but when we get back, there's going to be some kind of a consequence afterwards, I would think.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, where maybe they have an after-school thing that they like to do, or some downtime or whatever, and they don't get to do that because of being late again. If you're working on that.
Yeah. It's always nice and tidy if it's really related, like, okay, because we're late, we can't go, or you left your bike in the yard, you can't use your bike. But sometimes it just doesn't work, and you have to be a little creative of, what can kind of go along with this. To
Yes.
provide some pain, some consequence,
Yes.
even though they've got to go to school.
Yep.
I've tried to relate it to okay, you're making me late for work. What if I made you late for ball practice?
Yes.
Okay, I
That's
ended up
good.
being late. Now you're. Then I feel like it reflects badly on me, to the coaches and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, she can't even get him to practice on time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
where he'd have to deal with the consequence of being late, but then I feel like it reflects on me, why can't they get him here on time?
Uh-huh.
Where it's like,
Yeah.
well, that was a punishment that he had to show up late and deal with the consequences of coach, but
Yeah.
I feel like that
Yeah.
reflects poorly on me at the same time.
Yes, yeah.
So,
And if necessary, you could always pull this coach aside and say, we're trying to teach our son a lesson here, and this is what happened. If there's a consequence for him being late, that would be great.
Yeah. The bigger the better.
this
Wink, wink.
honestly though, that's what you're trying to teach, and if there's any kind of fear or wondering oh, is this reflecting badly on me? if you have that relationship with the coach, just say, this is what we're trying to teach our kids. And hopefully the coach would be like, that's cool. Awesome.
So
Thanks for
take
teaching.
time out of his coaching the other kids or disrupt what's going on there.
Yeah.
I want to be rude in that way. So
Right.
Good point.
Yeah.
I've just so far I've just said it like trying to like realize like, hey, you don't like it when you show up somewhere late. I don't like it when I show up somewhere late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like even a call or call to the coach and say, this is something that we're dealing with quite frequently. We're trying to teach some good practical lessons involved, something that wouldn't take him away from the coach, like you said, like you pulling him aside when you get there to take him away. Just, if you feel like you have that ability to do that. It's communication is always good. And I'm sure like any adults, like teachers or you would think coaches would totally be on board with that and say, awesome, good for you, that's a good idea, maybe even apply it to themselves.
Yeah.
So so structured consequences, and this is an F3, so we're let's see, foolish behavior does not always produce pain, and when it does not come naturally, like tripping over the cracks after you've told your child, or doing gymnastics in the house after telling your child, and they get hurt, it needs to be created artificially through structured consequences. So this may include the loss of privileges, like we just talked about, isolation, logical consequences, chastisement, or restitution. So let's look at logical consequences. The consequence of a parent employs to redirect a child's thinking and behavior should be logically associated with the offense. We've talked about that a lot. It needs to make sense. So your 3-year-old, if they deliberately disobey you, you've given them instructions like, please come here, and they run the other direction, may require a SWAT, to get their attention. But you would not do that to your 8-year-old. Let's say your 8-year-old, you tell them they have the privilege of going to ride their bike to school, and they're expected to come home right after school, and they decide to go to their friend's house for a little bit instead, and you're sitting, why is Ryan not home yet? What's going on? And then they're like, oh yeah, I stopped by a friend's house. Well, you're instructed to come right home after school. So that would, you wouldn't just swat them for that. An 8-year-old, you would probably, it would be better to say in the future, like, on Thursday, when you ask me if you can stay after to play with a friend, that will be a no now because of you did not obey me this time when I said you needed to come straight home. So it's a logical consequence. The goal is to help the child become self-governing according to a moral principle. A parent must consider circumstances, the child's age, and the motive behind the action when deciding which punitive measures would be the best for the child. Whichever consequence the parents employ, it should be logically associated with the offense. We keep talking about being logical, and that's important. Isolation, F5. Children are usually social beings. Isolation means temporarily taking away the privilege of social contact. It helps a child gain self-control. So when they're playing all together in a group of people, and a play group, for example, or kids playing out in the yard, playing tag or something, and somebody in the group, one of your child becomes disruptive and is continually, like maybe you've already given a verbal warning. This is like you've already done all these pre-activity things. Remember, it's a foundation. And they still are making a choice to be too rough or to
tackle the kids or whatever they're doing, then they need to be taken out of this might call for a time to be taken out of that group situation. And so whereas a reflective timeout is used before a child gets into trouble, because you're watching this behavior happen and you're like, come over here, you're getting too rough. This is when they've already tackled a person and you've already you've told them to be less violent. And so isolation is used after the fact. You may use it usually in association with another form of like maybe chastisement in this case as well as isolation. But you should, not just use it all the time for just, okay, we're going to pull you out. It should be sometimes associated with another form of punishment. And usually, depending on the age, that means chastisement along with it. So it can be very effective. Isolation can be very effective if it's not misused or used too often. And you can use this for children starting with 9 months of age through the middle years. And lastly, we're going to look at the very last square. And I say that because chastisement is not a last resort kind of punishment, but it is like there are so many things you can do, as we've learned, prior to needing to do this. So it's not something you use every single full weight. This is the full weight of the law kind of thing. And in our home for chastisement, if they knew, it was very clear, and we'll bring this up pretty soon, but it was very clear, if they made this choice, they knew that it meant a spanking. It's the biblical word chastisement and culturally we hear spanking, but so another form of corrective discipline is spanking. The biblical term is chastisement. This word best represents God's divine intention for parents to use physical pain to correct a child's rebellious activities. It means to inflict pain for the purpose of amending behavior.
Yeah. And this is really controversial. We all know that, to spank or not to spank, and there's a lot of people who are on each side of the fence. So anytime there's something controversial, I think it's great to go back to God's Word, and we're going to go through 5 scripture verses and just kind of read them to you, just to kind of show that, using pain, chastisement or spanking, it's really a biblical.
Okay.
Thank you for doing that. I've got my 3
Okay.
up here.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so first one is Deuteronomy 8:5. And what this says, know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you.
Hebrews 12:6 and 7 says, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone he accepts as a son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father?
All right, and 2 Samuel 7:14. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men, with floggings inflicted by men.
Revelations 3:19. Those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline, so be earnest and repent.
Good, and the last one, Proverbs 19:18. Discipline your son, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to his death. All right, and there's other scripture in there as well, but I think it's just good to see that through the Bible, through scripture, they actually encourage, pretty significant discipline for our kids, because it gets to their heart, and we want their hearts to grow. I think this might be a good time to share our example, because when we took this the first time, we only had one of our 4 kids. Jake was, actually...
We had 2.
Yeah, Audrey was born already, yep. So Audrey was very young. And we had never spanked Jake. We'd never, used chastisement for him. and we're going through this one, and we can just feel our like blood pressure kind of going up. We're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're encouraging us to spank our kids. And when we share our example, I think you'll understand why we didn't spank Jake and why just kind of why we were feeling that way, and how we progressed from that, more or less.
Yeah. So with Jake, he firstborn, he was is and still is a rule follower, and just the mere thought of disappointing us as parents broke his little heart. So when we were disappointed and put him we used timeouts, and we had a chair in the bathroom, and there he sat, and he would just cry. You could tell there was a change in his heart. He was like, I'm so sorry, like you can tell. And that's what you want to see, is a heart change behind this, okay? You're training their heart. That's always the basis of what you're doing, is training their hearts. And
we see for the next few days, it's like he's really, really good. It's
yeah.
like, well, it had a really big impact on him.
Yes.
We were really lucky with our first, by the way.
But then Audrey came along, and she would sit in her timeout chair when she did something wrong, and she'd just be like, am I done yet? There was no change in her heart.
Yeah.
And we were like, what do I do about this? This is not affecting her like it affected Jake. And but when we first learned of this, I mean, we then realized, like, oh, this made sense to us.
Yeah.
Even though we didn't, it really made us red hot mad.
Yeah, exactly.
First.
So we'll kind of get into some of that more. That's kind of our background, how we responded the first time we heard this. But it says here to spank or not to spank. When parents carry out proper discipline, everyone benefits. The child, the parent, society. There is a lot of controversy on the subject of spanking. Some view it as abuse, but the truth is, and I really believe this firmly, that any form of discipline on this flow chart, anything, if you take it to an extreme or if you carry it out in anger, really that could potentially be abusive. Whether it's the warning, there's verbal abuse, whether it's taking away a privilege, there's abuse there. Really any kind of discipline that's carried to an extreme, whether it's spanking or anything else on the chart, really could be potentially abusive. So spanking really does not constitute biblical discipline completely. It's not like that's all there is to it, is spanking, but it's one element within the entire scheme of things.
Yes.
And that's why I love this flow chart for this. It's one box out of how many?
Yeah.
So we're really not saying, this is the way you raise your kids, is you spank them all the time.
Right.
It's like, it really is something that if you do all this really well, and nobody's perfect, that's why I use the word well. We all say, oh boy, I think we went down the wrong part there. We could have handled this better.
Right.
But if you really are intentional about it and on the same page and work through it together, you're really not going to need to use that as much. And we'll get to this too. It actually gives an age. It'll say by age like 5, if you really start your kids with this, you're just about done spanking by about age 5. If your kids start with this from the very beginning. And I know we're not all in that situation, but it's really not what the Bible is recommending is spanking exclusively, but it's just one part of the bigger picture. So discipline by loving and nurturing parents is what gives biblical spanking its context. It does not mean punishment, but instead it means more of a process. It's a process of training and learning that fosters moral development. Discipline is a development that leads ultimately to the formation of Christ-like behavior and character in our child. We want our kids to be kingdom builders who live out the fruit of the Spirit and shine for Jesus to a broken world. The Bible doesn't command spanking, but it really does commend it. And I really like the concept that if you look at the word discipline, disciple is in there. And actually just change the last letter, take out the E, put a G, it's discipling. And that's really what we're doing with our kids. We want them to be more like Jesus. We want to disciple them through. And like in the scripture we just read, if you do that, it can be done in a loving way. And it really can, it's more what is our goal. It's not what's the process, but what are we trying to accomplish in our kids. So a good way to look at this is there's two ways that spanking is often implemented. There's the typical way, which is cultural spanking. Then there's what they really encourage in Growing Kids God's Way, and I really think it is biblical. It's more biblical chastisement. There's a lot of similarities, but there's some differences too. We're going to go through some things that some ways we should not spank our kids, basically. So God determines that the role of parents at the beginning of time. We're to act as governors over our kids. We want to rule them on the outside until the child is able to rule him or herself from the inside, from a heart that's virtuous and full. Proverbs 22:6, a very popular verse, train up a child in the way he or she should go, and when he or she grows, they will not depart from it. So what chastisement really means, there's three parts. It means to inflict pain with a controlled force on an individual to amend an inner attitude. So again, three parts. You're inflicting pain. There is a controlled force involved with that. And the whole idea is to amend an inner attitude. So I think a good way to show how those three things really work beautifully is to compare that to what cultural spanking often does. So on the next page here, there's differences. CS is cultural spanking, BC is biblical chastisement. So cultural spanking is something that parents do to a child. Biblical chastisement is something parents do for a child, looking at the process and what your goal is. Cultural spanking is a last resort. I have had it, I'm done, it's a last resort punishment. Biblical chastisement is an objective form of correction. Cultural spanking is an attempt to change outward behavior. You don't like their behavior, so we're going to make sure they never do that again. Biblical chastisement is used to change an inward attitude. Again, we're trying to train their hearts. And if you do it right, that's really the end result. Cultural spanking is performed throughout a child's life, even into the teenage years and beyond. Cultural spanking is often, but biblical chastisement is nearly completed by age 5. Not completely, but nearly. Cultural spanking frustrates the child. Biblical chastisement clears a child's guilty conscience, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Cultural spanking has no long-term positive effect, and biblical chastisement molds lifelong character. So now that we know the difference, we need to learn more about what does this look like? How do we do this? So chastisement, when and why? So chastisement truly is for an offense that requires, is related to rebellion. Whether it's active, passive, it's not as important that just there is rebellion, which is a heart issue. This includes defiance, disrespect, disobedience, and basically the definition of chastisement is it's a sensation of pain that draws attention to a foolish decision. Not a childish decision. Again, childish is something they do. There's no evil intent. It was a mistake type of a thing. You really don't want to, do chastisement for that. This is more for the foolish decisions. And not the level 1 or level 2, but the level 3. So chastisement, it serves as a mentor to teach a child to become a master over their foolish impulses. That's a good thing. Even as adults, we need that. We need to be masters over our foolish impulses. It's not only for the moment, but it's really for the future. And we always consider the dignity of the child with chastisement. Therefore, it should always be in private. And I think we've seen plenty of examples out in the grocery store or in the middle of, the narthex in church, the lobby, or just different things when it's just in public. It's really discouraged. It really should be a very private matter. If you're using this one box out of all these, it should be a private matter between usually the parent and the child, but sometimes another authority figure over the child. So that's one thing. It should always be private. Second, they teach it really should never be on bearskin. That's kind of a dignity type thing. And we lowered their pants. We kept their underwear on basically. but they do encourage it. It's not on bearskin, just to kind of preserve their dignity. And the goal is not to embarrass your child into right behavior or to intimidate them. I'm bigger than you are, I'm stronger than you are, it's my way or the highway. Or you don't want to make a public example of them, type of a thing. And unfortunately, cultural spanking often does that, but biblical chastisement is entirely different.
Yeah, you see that stuff. I even see it out in public, like
Yes.
at the store,
Yes.
the grocery store.
Yep.
It just happened a couple of weeks ago. Melissa and I were at Walmart,
Yeah.
and this little kid was in the cart,
Yeah.
and he was being childish
Yeah.
and grabbing stuff
Yeah.
off the shelf. He couldn't have been more than 2 years old, 2 or
Yeah.
3 maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding. The mom got so mad. She picked him up out of the cart by his arm,
Yeah.
Wow.
set him on the floor, spanked him, and then picked him back up by the arm and put him
Oh.
back in
Yeah.
the cart. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
I kind of want to go over there and do it to you
Yeah. Yeah.
to show you how that feels.
Kind of makes you wonder if that's what they do in public, like what.
What
What are they,
Yes.
what are they doing at
Yeah.
home?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
You know, you're comfortable
Yeah.
putting that display on in front of
Yeah.
complete strangers.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's where your frustration just comes out. Like you just have you're teaching your child, I have no self-control and I'm
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's really like
Yeah.
whatever we are presenting to our kids as what we want their standard to be, we're raising them to God's standard. We also must be up there. And so
Yeah.
to have self-control is
Yeah.
very important
We
and
just
not to
leave.
be our wits' end.
Yeah.
If our kids are getting
Yep.
ridiculous and it's getting to the point where we can't get anything accomplished,
Yeah.
then we leave.
I think there's wisdom in
She'll
that.
take the kids out to the van, I'll put whatever we had in
Yeah.
the cart back, or take it up to the front and let the customer service lady know what's going on,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and we leave. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna make a fool out of myself,
Yeah.
and my kids are not,
Can embarrass
Like,
them. Yeah.
they're not it's not for anybody else to see,
Yeah.
but they need to know that their behavior is not
Yeah.
acceptable, and being at the store is a privilege.
Yeah.
We don't have to be here right now.
Yeah.
We have food at home.
Yeah.
This is something that we were doing
Yeah.
just to get out of the house.
Yeah.
So,
And
Yeah.
that's really good because then before that, you can use that pre-activity warning. We expect good behavior in the store, and that means this, and this. You're not going to
Yep.
pull food off the shelf. Whatever it is. And then if they're not living up to that while
Yep.
you're in the store, you've already said, if this happens, we're leaving, and
Yeah.
so they know, like, wow, they're serious.
Yeah. yep. And,
And
when you follow
next
through
time-
with
yeah.
it, that's when they
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the thing,
Man, they weren't
consistency.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what we do on the way to the store.
Yes.
Lay it out there. Look,
Yeah, that's
this
good.
is what we expect.
Good job.
If this is what you choose to do,
Yeah.
don't be surprised when
Yeah.
we leave the store without what we came for.
Yeah.
Right.
Because sometimes when you first do that, if you don't explain it to them outright ahead of
Yeah.
time, and then punish them
Yeah.
in the moment,
Yeah.
and they kind of look at you like, why are you punishing me for
Yeah.
that? But now you have expectations laid out.
Right.
It's up to
Like,
them.
look,
It's
this
their
is,
decision.
you guys already know, this is ball's in your court now, buddy.
Yeah.
Do with it what you will, but
Yeah.
if you choose
Yeah.
to be defiant and not go by what we expect, then we're gonna leave,
Yeah.
and that's all there is to it. Then
Yeah.
you don't hear the crying and the why are we leaving?
Yeah.
They're like, darn it.
Yeah.
Right.
I knew it, and I
Right.
made that
Yeah.
choice anyway, and
Right.
this is the consequence.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Adam,
Yeah.
you're just spot on today as far as leading into the next section. See, that's exactly where we're
Way
going
to
with this
go.
too. Yeah.
Good
I like
job.
I like the way you even use the word childishness, because that truly is. If there's a 2-year-old who grabs something off the thing, it's
I don't know
not.
any better.
There's no ill motive there,
No,
and that's where you want to do more of a warning.
I'm
you know,
38
for-
years old, and
Yeah.
I'm walking down the aisle and I see a box of confetti muffins out of the corner of my eye.
Yeah.
The colors catch your eye.
Yeah.
Whatever they're advertising,
Yeah.
and that's what kids do. They
Yeah.
see bright colors or a box, and
Yeah.
they don't know what's inside the
Yeah.
thing.
Right.
Yeah.
He's just grabbing because he likes whatever he sees.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Now, you're gonna have to teach him later on. Don't be doing that, or you'll have a nasty grocery bill. And
Yeah.
That's true.
Probably the worst food on the planet
Yeah.
to show for it.
Really high cholesterol.
Right, right.
So kind of like you said, parents who train the first time obedience, they're going to spank more at first, but less in the long run. Once they know and they kind of see how this works, that's really true. If you really train the first time obedience, it is tough at first. There is more spanking, but over time in the long run, they kind of know, on the way to the store, I get the instructions. If this happens, is what's going to happen. We're not going to keep doing this. So the higher standard really forces objectivity by removing the guesswork for both the parent and the child. It's like, both know exactly what's going to be happening when you're objective with this. So with objective chastisement, both the parent and the child know exactly when a spanking will result and why it is needed. The child is the one who ultimately determines whether spanking will occur by what he or she does or does not do. And you look at the other side of this, it's really sad but true. Parents who do not require first-time obedience, they spank more subjectively, just more based on what kind of mood am I in, is it what kind of day are we having?
Or don't have any other way to punish them. They don't know anything else.
No other tools or types.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what they were showing.
Right.
Yeah.
And with subjective chastisement, parents determine the spanking based on mood, whims, other external factors that are sometimes totally unrelated to the child's actions. And this causes the child to live in fear. And it's like, okay, what kind of day are we going to have today? Yesterday I threw a chair at my sibling and it wasn't a big deal. Today I just, pick up a can off the rack at the grocery store and I'm being spanked.
Right.
It's subjective chastisement and the child lives in fear, not knowing for sure what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's more objective, consistent, then if both the parent and the child know over time kind of what is going to happen, then it's really the child who determines when it's going to happen. So childish punishment and foolish behavior. Chastisement and punishment are not interchangeable words. They don't refer to the same action. There's just one type of chastisement, but there's many types of punishment. So chastisement is always associated with rebellion, but rebellion is not always corrected by chastisement. It's not always a level 3 offense. It could be a level 1 or 2 at times. When a child breaks a rule, he or she will feel the guilt as a result of the sin. And chastisement is basically it's a price paid to remove the guilt, and we've seen this with our kids. It really does. It frees them from the guilt. After you do chastisement, in a biblical way, it's like afterwards. So it's like they really feel like this has been dealt with. They've experienced some pain. They saw mom and dad's disappointment, but it's like, okay, we're moving on now. It's not like they're carrying this guilt of what they did all day because, they did this, they know it's wrong, but you haven't really dealt with it. And you really kind of deal with it and they can move on without carrying that guilt around. Let's see, and the last thing, the incorrect type of punishment frustrates the child and their guilt remains, when there's under-punishing going on especially.
So again, in our house, we had specific things that they knew if they chose this, it would result in a spanking. And so it was no guesswork. If they, when they were told to do something and they chose to disobey, that like first time obedience, we really, when they were younger, especially if mom says to put on your coat, you put on your coat, or to come here. You want them to just start learning to not just obey you, but ultimately they're obeying God, as they grow up. But if they lied, if they hit another sibling, you might say, well, doesn't that confuse them? They hit, so we hit, but it's so much different because they're hitting out of frustration and because and you are, going into a private place, having them think, explaining to them, it's very controlled. And they know in advance, if I hit, this is going to be my punishment. This is going to be so it's the guesswork's out of it. It's not due to whims or moods. It's like, this is it. And that's where consistency is so important. So let's move on to parents who love will chastise. God loves his children immeasurably more than we parents can love our children. And as we know, God corrects his children. Understanding the reason for chastisement and the consequences of suppressed rebellion should make it easy to understand that chastisement is an expression of parental love. It's very important to really get this concept that you don't break a child's spirit by teaching, training, correcting, and living to God's standard. It only strengthens a child. But a child's spirit can be broken when his dignity is robbed by being called names, being humiliated, screamed at, and belittled in front of others. And this just brings order to your life. Like, it takes all the frustration, all the, I'm at my wit's end, I've had it up to here, you know, like all the warnings, all the, it just takes all of that out of the picture when there's consistency in what you're going to do as parents. You're not yelling at them, and you're not screaming at them and pulling them by the, you know, it's just like, so it's more definitely controlled and orderly. In our book, it talked about the rod of reproof, and the rod in the Bible was used as a symbol of authority and of rulership. It was also a symbol of a God's anger and chastisement. So as far as in reference to child training, a rod is an instrument of correction, not a symbol of training. And so they wanted to bring out the point in Growing Kids God's Way that maybe having an object to spank rather than your hand. And then they went into, like, you don't want it to be too stiff, and like a wooden spoon, for instance, because that could really hurt the child, damage, not just inflict pain, which is what you're trying to just do, is inflict some pain, but actually hurt the child, cause injury. But you don't want it to be too flexible, like a belt, for instance, and you don't want, like, dad's belt. You don't want that, you know. So we had a flexible spatula that we used that wasn't too flexible, it wasn't too stiff, but it was our rod of reproof.
Yeah, the kids grew up thinking a spatula was the spanking tool.
Yeah. So now they never use no, I'm just kidding.
And the idea is just to cause a stinging pain.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not like a over and over and over type thing.
Yes.
Just you know, a few times, just. And you want there to be stinging and pain, but not to the point where it leaves a mark or injury or anything like that.
And we never, that's I mean, I'll just step through, like, I think it's helpful to just kind of know, not that you have to do exactly what we did, but if let's say our child decided to hit their sibling, and so we'd say, Audrey, please go to the bathroom. And she would walk herself to the bathroom. I would get myself under control. I wouldn't say, you wait till your dad gets home. I would say, we're going to deal with this. And so I would totally be not angry when I walked into that bathroom. I would be in the mindset of, okay, I love my child, but sometimes when you love a child, you gotta teach, you know, have a lesson involved in this. And they knew. And so I would then, and we're going to go to, I guess I should save that because we're doing what to do. I'm kind of going right into this. Yes.
I would do it because then it's what do you do afterwards.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So then I would say, Audrey, you hit your brother, and you know that requires a spanking. And so then I would again expose her bottom enough the top.
That's an important part to really verbalize why they're doing it, because again, it's like, okay, it just solidifies in their mind. Yep, right. That's right. I did this, and
not that they're just getting it for no reason.
Right.
Yeah. So we'd always say exactly what they did wrong beforehand.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you know, mommy loves you very much, and this does cause me pain to do this, but I want to help you. And to gain like self-control, when instead of hitting your brother when he's not giving you your toy, you use your words. And that's what I'm trying to teach you. Then I would expose just the top part of her backside, underwear up, use the spanking tool to inflict a little pain. And usually there was some crying because they are disappointed, they're hurt, that, it's painful. But then I would suggestions what to do after. For us, I would get my child up on my lap and hold them and just say, I love you so much. And I just want to explain to you again that when you hit your brother, this is the consequence. And I love you enough not to let you hit other people, because how do you feel when you're hit? Well, it really hurts my feelings and it hurts my heart, or whatever their comment is. Yes, it does, and that's what you just did to your brother. So you talk about it, and then you may you can affirm them by praying with them too. Like, Lord, help Audrey to have self-control. Bring out those character traits you want to build up in your child. And then it's done. And then there's a list in here. You can sit and talk, and then talk about their actions and why they were wrong. You can pray. You can just sit with them until they stop crying, and then just say, okay, we're done with, this is done and over. Let's move on with our day. So you don't have to do every step each time, but you can just kind of gauge your child, how old they are, what they know, what maybe even have them tell you, why did we have to do this? Well, I chose to hit my brother, and because at different ages, they can begin to tell you, like, okay, this is my choice. I chose to do this. And so that's healthy and helpful. Let's see. So at the bottom there, it says use a balanced approach. Every situation is different. And so just read your child's reaction and their response. And you know your child best, so you know what they'll need, and it'll come to you. Sometimes chastisement fails to work because parents might use the wrong instrument to train to cause that pain. Parents swat hard enough to get the child upset, but not hard enough to outweigh the pleasure of sin. So they're just like, oh, if that's all I get, I love sin. This whatever is more pleasurable. Parents chastise through clothing that is too thick, so it doesn't cause any kind of stinging or pain. Parents talk too much, hoping to persuade by logic. Parents are inconsistent, which is a big one. Parents fail to establish clear boundaries. Again, that's why we had clear things. If they did this was their choice. And then parents are afraid that the child will not love them or misinterpret, like, oh, you hit, so I can hit. But if you follow this correctly, it won't be like that. You'll have very much self-control and not in anger or anything like that. Not your wit's end, not last resort, which cultural spanking does.
Yeah. Good. And then just some summarizing points on chastisement. Parents should reserve chastisement for acts and attitudes of rebellion, both active rebellion and passive rebellion. Parents cannot chastise a child into submission. Parents cannot undo years of poor parenting by chastisement. It's not really a solution that works that way. Parents must chastise consistently or not at all. Cultural spanking and biblical chastisement are different. The rod should be somewhat flexible, but not stiff or unbending. Parents should never use a chastising instrument on a child unless they have tried it out first on themselves. It is a good idea, just so you're aware of,
The force, yeah,
of
exactly.
pain, make sure it's not too much or too little that way. And parents should never use the father's belt as a rod of correction. Parents should only use erotic correction in privacy on a child's clothed bottom. And then just a reminder about child abuse. Child abuse is any act of omission or commission that endangers or impairs a child's physical or emotional health and development. There's a great difference between inflicting pain and inflicting injury. And when parents carry out proper biblical discipline, everyone benefits: the child, the parents, and society. I wonder if we should stop the recording
Sure.
before we get to questions. At what time